Hey guys, Dave Keller here with Market Misbehavior. Someone was asking me recently about a particular stock, and I told them overall looks like a strong chart and gave them a little more details. And they stopped for a second. They said, "You know what? You said that it's a strong chart. Like, what does that actually mean? Like, what do you see on the chart that tells you it's a strong chart?" So I'll show you the example that I shared with them as an example of a strong chart, and then I will answer the question: when is a good chart still a good chart? So I'm often asked about different stocks and ETFs, and I have a go-to chart, probably that you've seen many times on this channel and also my show on StockCharts TV, sort of my go-to 2-year daily chart with price, moving averages, RSI, and relative strength. 90% of the time, that's the chart that I'm looking at. Certainly, it's always the one that I start with most often. But when I was asked about what defines a strong chart, really made me think about what is on that checklist, right? What sort of things am I checking off? What boxes am I checking just to feel comfortable describing something as a strong chart? Before we get to the chart and the example and how it's evolved since then, if you like this sort of thinking about technical analysis, market history, investor psychology, won't you subscribe to my channel? Also, give the video a like if you appreciate it. We very much appreciate that back. What do you think about the stock I'm about to show you? Thumbs up or thumbs down, and why? Let me know in the comments below. Let's look at the chart. The chart is Applied Materials, AMAT. It's a semiconductor name. The semiconductor space, of course, has done very well since the October market low. It certainly has done especially well here in 2023 through mid-April. That group overall has pulled back a little bit, and you'll see what I'm talking about here on the next chart. But I was asked about this particular example at the beginning of March. So this is the stock through March 1st, which is how it looked when I shared the chart with the person who had asked. And they told me what describes a strong chart. I kind of went down the list from top to bottom. I thought about with each one of the data sets that I was showing here, what about it tells me it's a strong chart? And I'll show you what I mean. First off, the price is going up, right? And that, I think, goes back to Charles Dow's original methodology, what we now call Dow theory, which is just looking at price action over time and defining the trend. An uptrend is a pattern of higher highs and higher lows. A downtrend is a pattern of lower lows and lower highs. So the very first thing on my checklist, and the very first thing I would encourage you to have on your own checklist, is a basic analysis of trend, just looking at the prices. Is the price going up or down? And again, you can visually see that the chart of Applied Materials, I would argue on the time frame that I'm highlighting, has rotated from going down through the into the fourth quarter of last year to going up over the last 5 or 6 months. Also, we can define that a little more clearly by looking at the patterns of the highs and the lows. You can do that visually just by looking at the highs and the lows that kind of stick out, sort of the peaks and valleys on the price along the way. There are also indicators. So on stock charts, there's an indicator called the zigzag indicator, which automates that and it looks at percent moves or some sort of methodology to, just visually show you where there's price swings are. But overall, I tend to just do it pretty simple based on the highs and the lows. And I would say at this point, higher highs and higher lows. Most recently, and this gets to the second point, where is the price relative to the moving averages? It's above 2 upward sloping moving averages, and that's important point number 1. So it's above the 50-day moving average, which is sloping higher. That tells you that in the short term, the trend is pretty robust, and the fact that it's remaining above an upward sloping moving average means that overall the trend has been improving over time. The 200-day moving average, honestly, more flat than sloping up. It's certainly not going down anymore, and the fact that the price is now above both of those moving averages, you have price, shorter term moving average, longer term moving average. That's the trend. That's the configuration that essentially represents an uptrend. So recently pulled back to a 50-day moving average, bouncing higher. That's why it checks that second box. The third one is looking at momentum, and I would describe this as the momentum is strong, but not excessive. That means that the RSI is above 40 and ideally above 50, but it's not above 70 or 80, right? It's not telling you we've gone too high too quickly. It's more of a strong trend, but not overly strong, right? It's kind of in a good place within the overall trend. Finally is the relative strength, and I would argue out of everything I've just said, this is the most important, which is looking at an upward sloping relative strength line. And again, to differentiate these two, this is RSI, the Relative Strength Index. This is a measure of momentum created by Wells Wilder in the 1970s, very commonly used. Relative strength, or what's often called true relative strength or relative performance or something like that, is basically looking at the performance of this thing, this stock in this example, versus a benchmark, versus other things, right? So how is this particular chart looking relative to all the other charts I could be considering at any given point? I usually do the relative strength to the SPY, so the SP 500 ETF. So the fact that this line is going up over the last 4 months tells me that Applied Materials has been outperforming the S&P. So in early May or early March, when I was asked about this chart, this is the chart that this is how I described it, and this is what caused me to describe this as a strong chart. Let's fast forward to where we're at today here, third week in April, and talk about what the chart has done since then. Well, the chart we showed previously was right about here. From there, let's look at what's happened, right? And go in order. Start with price. Price has gone up, but here's issue number one. Are we still making higher highs? I'm not so sure, and I would actually say probably not, right? And the fact is, if you look at this, right, each one of these subsequent the swing highs keeps getting higher until this one. You can see we attempted to break above the February high, but have not quite done so. A lot of stocks actually fit that description as well. And there are some things like home builders and some semiconductors, certainly gold stocks have been able to break through their February highs, but just like for the S&P 500, that's the 4,200 level. A lot of things are sort of trading to, but not through resistance just yet. Very, very few that are actually doing so. So I'm not surprised the fact that it's found resistance along with a lot of other things, but can no longer have me describe it as a particularly strong chart according to this one data set. We'll come back to the rest of the price here in a second. What about the moving averages? So here's the problem. The 50-day moving average is actually sloping downwards right now. The price is actually broken down through the 50 days. So you can see we bounced off the 50-day moving average 2 other times after that chart that I shared with you. But this last time here a couple of weeks ago, we actually broke below the 50-day, and for now, we're finding resistance at the 50-day. So now we're below a downward sloping 50-day moving average. Not ideal. The 200-day moving average now is very clearly sloping upwards, and as long as the price holds that is still overall a fairly constructive setup. But again, not as ideal, not as strong as I would have described it before. What about the momentum characteristics? I would argue that this is still okay, right? On pullbacks in an uptrend, you often find the RSI pulls back to around 40, and we've done other videos on our channel that talk about that phenomenon. In a bull market phase, that's sort of the configuration. In a bear market phase, like in 2022, you can see we rarely get near the overbought region. The RSI usually tops out around 60. So now we've rotated to more of a bullish phase with the RSI. And on the most recent pullback here around $110, the RSI sort of bottomed out right around 40. That's right where the momentum bottomed out in late December, which ended up being a pretty decent bounce. So overall, I would say that's bending but not broken, if that makes sense. Finally, the relative strength is where there's a bit of a concern, right? So if I draw a trend line on the relative strength line here, in the last, we'll call it from the October lows, you can see we tested it a number of times, but now we've clearly broken that. Is it breaking down a ton? I mean, no, it's certainly the last month it's been underperforming the S&P, but certainly it's gone from what was a clear outperformer to very much not so in the last month, and over the long term, year to date, still up on the S&P, but not by much. So now you can see how I would probably not describe this necessarily as a strong chart, right? It's not sort of the textbook ideal chart, but it's not broken, right? And that's how I described it, I think, with the momentum. It's sort of bending but not broken. I think that's a fair way to describe it. Let's go back to the price and you'll see another sort of measurement. That purple trend line that I drew before is actually the high around $125. And I would argue if and when AMAT can get above there, that would sort of continue this pattern of higher highs, which would be encouraging. Now we actually are not necessarily making a lower low, but we're testing support right around $110, right? So we just bottomed out there this week. You can see the last time we were at 110 was here in February. Before that, this was actually resistance level. This was the peak in August, the peak in November, the peak in December, and then in January, and then finally late January, it broke above and then started retesting it from above. So that level has been an important pivot point for AMAT. So I'm not surprised at all that we're finding support yet again at $110. But it also tells me as long as we hold $110, things are not too bad, right? If we would break 110, that's where, based purely on the price, things could get a little more concerning. So what makes a good chart still a good chart? I think there's a difference between good and great, right? And strong and great are a little more comparable adjectives. So I would say what makes a great chart is the fact that all of those checks that I listed out at the beginning of the video are all positive, right? Are all sort of bullish. That's what, to me, describes a strong chart or a great chart. A good chart is one that isn't broken yet, but it's not necessarily a leading chart anymore. What's interesting about it, and I guess that's why, if you think about the history of Wall Street, that is ideally what a hold rating or a neutral rating really should be for, right? Something that isn't breaking down. It's not horrible, but it's not great anymore. So if you hold it, I'd probably still hold it, right? That's the idea of a hold rating or a neutral rating. It's not an actionable buy or an actionable sell. It's more of a neutral rating. Now, again, I'm not making any recommendation here, so don't imply that. I'm just thinking, from the traditional Wall Street methodology, that this type of chart is the type of chart that I would expect when I was seeing a neutral rating in a space, something that's not horrible, but it's not great. It's kind of in the middle. And get back to the point of this video, right? What makes a good chart still a good chart? It pulls back, but it holds support, right? Price, in this case, holds $110. The RSI holds around 40. Those are the conditions that would make it still a good chart. What would make a good chart back to a great chart? This is where we check those boxes off. I would argue that we checked at the beginning. Is the price making higher highs and higher lows? Is it above 2 upward sloping moving averages? The momentum strong but not excessive? Is the relative strength turning higher? Those things all happen on the chart of AMAT. The other semiconductor stocks and the ETFs like the SMH and the SOX, overall, this could be a great space yet again. I hope this was a helpful discussion through what the conditions that would, I guess, create those adjectives or encourage those adjectives like good versus great. When is a strong chart a strong chart? When does a great chart become a good chart? I've always thought that doing it systematically by having a checklist that really helps you focus on each piece of evidence separately, then look at the overall weight of the evidence or the mosaic that you've painted. I think that's super important. If you thought this was a helpful walkthrough, a technical analysis checklist using AMAT, I hope you'll give the video a thumbs up. We'd very much appreciate it. Put a comment below. What do you see next for AMAT and why? Let me know. For Market Misbehavior, I'm Dave Keller. Take care, and I'll see you soon.